Hey there, welcome to the Kids Eating Broccoli and Dr. Brad Ellisor, and I'm Dr. Brad, and I wanted to talk today about how we got to where we are, and is there something we can do before it's too late? And what I'm talking about is the current health situation, the current health status of our kids, and how basically imperiled they are to some degree by all of the chronic illness. Childhood obesity is skyrocketing. Childhood diabetes is skyrocketing. ADHD, ADD is more than skyrocketing. It's like quantum leaping up the scale in terms of incidence and diagnosis and treatments and all these kind of things. And so today we want to tackle the question of why. Like, how did we get here? Like, what the heck is going on where all these chronic illnesses have gone up so much just in the last generation, really? And I mean, really a couple generations ago is when it started, but in this last generation is where things have really taken off in terms of skyrocketing. And so I wanted to start kind of at the beginning, though, because really I think it's important to understand something before we dive into like all the problems and all the bad stuff. That everyone is alive today, each and every one of us, is actually a product of genetic selection, meaning that I'm sure heard the concept of survival of the fittest. And what that actually means is that we are the genetic best versions of humans there have ever been on the planet because all of our ancestors survived. They were the fittest that survived each successive generation all the way up to us. And so I bring that up because in a lot of cases, they were given this story or sort of sold this bill of goods that we all these problems are really just genetics. Like kids are just have genetically predisposed for allergies and genetically predisposed for ADHD and genetically predisposed for childhood cancer and genetically predisposed for obesity and all these things. But really that's so illogical because really everyone who's alive now is genetically predisposed for optimal health, because we've made it this far through the genetic, obstacle course of generation after generation. So something else has to be going on. There's no doubt about it. It's not debatable, though in some circles people like to debate it, really mostly just to kind of push the responsibility elsewhere. So I'm going to run through the laundry list here. We're going to talk about how we got here. What are the things, the big things that are causing this? And then in future sessions, we'll dive into some of the specifics about each of these things, really the worst of the worst, and then what do we do about it? So really the big thing to consider is that what we're talking about is toxins in our environment, right? And the biggest toxin that we have that our kids run into on a regular basis is food, because food is the biggest source of chemicals that we put into our body these days on a regular basis. And our food supply has been really hijacked from us. Slowly but surely over these last 100 years or so, the food industry, the chemical industry has hijacked our food supply, such to the point that there used to be a time in history where you could get away with eating what everybody else eats. And you would generally live a relatively long life free of most chronic illness. But now, if you do that, you're destining yourself for early death, for chronic illness, and for pain and a lot of drugs prescribed to you. And our kids too. That's why we're seeing all these chronic illnesses dive up in our kids. We're talking about things like pesticides in the environments, genetically modified organisms, and all the whole host of problems that GMOs in our food are causing with our kids, from cancers to infertility problems to all kinds of stuff like that. Plastics and estrogens from our environment and all of the ways we're seeing, kids go into puberty earlier and all kinds of difficulties with that type of stuff. And then we jump into what's really purposely added to the food supply. That's the artificial flavors, artificial colors, and the artificial preservatives. And those cause tremendous amount of brain inflammation. And that's really a big part of why we're seeing so many of these issues with attention and hyperactivity and all these type of things. And then you add on that the fact that most people who eat a standard American diet is enzyme deficient, dead foods, and allergens, and these different, and all the pesticides on our foods causing leaky gut syndrome that then these proteins go into our blood and cause blood-brain barrier reactions and autoimmune disorders. And then we go to the fact that because of all these dead enzyme deficient foods are eaten, people have nutrient deficiencies. And these are like the gross nutrients, like magnesium deficiencies, vitamin D deficiencies, omega-3 deficiencies. And this is throwing the balance of our brain chemistry out. And so it's really no wonder that we're seeing the symptoms show up in our entire population. And it's really no wonder if you think about it, because these are a lot of neurochemical, neurohormonal problems and imbalances. It's no wonder that we're seeing it in the population of our kids first and foremost, because they're the most at risk. They're the most fragile to this because they're growing and changing so rapidly, going through different stages of life so rapidly, that bioaccumulation of toxicity, though shorter because they haven't been alive as long, is much, much more impactful. And so now our kids, because they're living in this toxic environment, eating this toxic food supply, are being labeled as being disordered. And they're given drugs to cover up those symptoms. And then we start that cycle, more chemicals, without ever really addressing the cause. So today's episode here was really for the purpose of laying out the laundry list to kind of give a context of here's how we got to where we are. And like I said, we're going to dive into some of these other topics in more detail. And we're going to also, along with that, go to what do we do about it? Where do we go from here? How can we make these differences? And is it, is there hope? Is it too late? Or, can we really make a difference and help our kids go from being the first generation in history that's expected to live shorter than their parents, to the best generation? That's part of our goal with the Kids Eating Broccoli, is to make the next generation the best generation. So I hope you'll join me in the future sessions as we cover these other topics in some more detail and get into the solution side of things. But I wanted to jump into sort of really how we got to where we are in a broad stroke sense. So I want to invite you also, I love to do a call to action at the end of these. Join our Facebook group. Our closed Facebook group is called the Family Wellness Legacy Facebook group. And it's free. It's not, it's just a closed group. So I can have some sort of restriction on people getting in there and trying to sell stuff and stuff like that. But we share a lot of different ideas. Other parents are in there. I do special trainings and special things just in that group. So check it out. Go to Facebook. I'll drop the link below. But you can find it if you just search in Facebook Family Wellness Legacy in the groups and join, and I'll get you in there. All right, you guys take care. And this is Dr. Brad, Kids Eating Broccoli, signing off.